welcome to the second annual NETCONF and YANG business case. We did this last year for the first time, and I think that the industry has come a long way in 1 year. I'm delighted to say that we're making quite a bit of progress with NETCONF and YANG, as well as getting a lot of multi-vendor support. This is also new for us. Tail-f, as last year we were a standalone company. This year we're part of Cisco. But we're still driving standards for NETCONF and YANG. And as you can see, we have a fantastic panel set up of both service providers and vendors. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to come into this event. I know it's fantastic weather outside and people have had a long day here at the FIRA. So I really want to welcome you to this event. I'm happy to say that we'll be moderated today by Caroline Chappell from Heavy Reading. And I'd like to have all of the panelists maybe go down the line and do a quick introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Well, I'd like to add, as the moderator for the panel, I'd like to add my thanks to Tail-f Tail-f or Cisco company, of course, for inviting me to do this, and also a big welcome to the audience. So I'm Caroline Chappell. I'm a principal analyst at Heavy Reading, and I cover all topics NFV and cloud.
I'm Carl Moberg. I'm a technical director in the Cloud and Virtualization group. I'm from the Tail-f team. So now I do quite a bit of standards work. That's why I think I've been invited here for NETCONF and YANG. I do quite a bit of work together with our larger customers and our product management teams.
I'm Dave Ward from Cisco. I'm the chief architect.
I'm Margaret Kiyosi from AT&T. I'm a distinguished network architect, I think is my title, but my focus is actually implementation of Domain 2.0 in AT&T.
Axel Klaubeck, Deutsche Telekom. Within the group CTO team, I'm leading the efforts on the new IP architecture we call TerraStream, and I'm also responsible for DT's infrastructure cloud strategy.
Hi, I'm Jack Waters from Level 3 Communications. I'm the technology officer. And I think I'm here because I believe we might be the largest deployment of Tail-f, so at about 40,000 devices.
Hi, I'm Ihab Touazi. I'm the CTO at Equinix, and I didn't think we'll get quickly to the who has the largest deployment.
I had to throw it out there before Margaret got.
Hi, I'm Guy Shemesh from Alcatel-Lucent. I'm heading the Cloudband product, which is an NFV platform.
Hi, I'm Jeff Madsen. I'm from Juniper Networks CTO office.
Renee. Thanks, Renee. I think I'm going to have to stand both to be able to see my long line of panelists and also, obviously, to keep order. I mean, last year, in our last year's panel, we actually had Cisco and Juniper sitting next to one another. I've taken the precaution of separating them this year, but obviously we're going to have an Equinix Level 3 spat here, so I'll just stand up and keep some order here. Okay, well, welcome all the panelists. I mean, I think this is fantastic testament. We'd had about 5 people on the panel last year. This year we've expanded to 7. We I think we don't have Ericsson this year. We've got Alcatel-Lucent instead from the service provider side. From the vendor side, but from the service provider side, we've not just got Axel, we've got this illustrious team of 4 service providers all rooting for YANG. So I think this is fantastic testament, actually, for, as Renee said, how far this standard has come. I'm sure there probably isn't anyone in the room that isn't familiar with NETCONF YANG, but just in case, I've given Carl the task of in 60 seconds giving us a quick primer. So Carl, over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. I'll really try to be brief here. So for those of you who hasn't really been bored to death by my face talking about this, there's 2 technologies at play here. One is actually a modeling language, or if you like, a more general term, a contract language. It's called YANG. It's an IETF RFC. It's actually what's called standards track. So for those of you who care about these things, it's on its way to become part of the core set of standards for the internet, along other luminaries like TCP and HTTP and IP. So it's a way of expressing the configuration and operational parameters that something can implement. That something normally, especially with this team, is a router or a switch or something that's in a physical or in a virtual form factor. So it's a way, if you like, to have a box describe to you what it can do for you, okay? So it's a very, very key, in our mind, it's a key technology to allow for much lighter and faster integration between moving parts and lower the pain of actually putting together things as complicated as an NFV-style network. A companion technology to the YANG language is a protocol called NETCONF. Just to make sure that you guys and girls get this, we believe that YANG has a very profound effect on the industry, and NETCONF is a protocol to manipulate configuration according to YANG. There's a couple of other protocols as well, but NETCONF has really stood the test of time here. It's been around for 8 years, and we have a wide variety of implementations in the industry, so all the vendors that you see on stage here actually has an implementation of that. So it's kind of a complementary technology to YANG that, again, we believe will significantly lower the cost of instrumenting or integrating the moving parts in an NFV style or an SDN style network. So the combination is really powerful. And again, just look at the team here, you'll see that it's actually making a little bit of waves in the industry.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Carl. Right, I'm going to start with you, Margaret, with this for the first question, partly because I think AT&T Domain 2.0 has been one of the movers and shapers, really, of the industry. That announcement, and AT&T has been very visible in its support for YANG. And then following Axel, because Axel, you were talking last night. In fact, you mentioned it last night and said how when you'd first started with YANG, you actually didn't see much industry traction. So I'm going to ask the two of you to really give us your views on how you've seen this change over the past few years as pioneers. What have you seen that's different? Starting with you, Margaret.
Well, we're seeing traction, and the reason why people have asked, why did AT&T pick YANG and NetConf? And I said, I don't know if we did a thorough job as Axel's team might have done, but our choice was very simple. We came up with an idea. We actually wanted our engineers to do an analysis and do in the field, and no one had time. So we took this idea and we went running around to all the vendors. I don't know if you remember this, Dave, and just say, okay, what do you think about YANG? Do you have an opinion? And everyone said they didn't care. They just wanted the industry to focus on one and just evolve, because all these modeling languages have issues. And so we said, okay, then let's do YANG. And so in the meantime, you have Deutsche Telekom, of course, implementing and so forth and things like that. So one of the things that we're happy with is we're converging. We're converging on a modeling language as an industry. We're converging on a communications between configurations of a common way, getting away from CLI. Now, I graduated decades ago from college, and back then we were talking about machine interfaces and away from human, and it's sort of amazing this industry still has CLI. It is so archaic. It's like now finally we're waking up to NetConf. Okay, fine. So let's get on with it. Let's just evolve and then get into full automation. It's the only way to automate completely.
Okay, thank you, Axel. What was your story? Obviously, it was more sort of German engineering approach.
Not really. Actually, we had a Swedish component in there as well. That was before we actually ran into Tail-f. That was actually a strange coincidence. So we developed that view, that vision about a new way of actually running our network. Because obviously, simplifying the network, bringing data centers in, yeah, that's one part. But if you don't change the legacy OSS, you won't solve the problem. So we as operators want to become more agile. We want to be more flexible on our customer requirements. And with the legacy OSS, there's just no way to do that. Because when you look at lead times for mass market products, typically between 1 and 2 years, depending on the operator, that's not really agile. And if you talk to an internet company and talk about a partnership, and you tell them, yeah, come back in 2 years, we're going to launch your product then. No. Okay. So we had that vision. Let's use YANG actually consistently throughout this new setup on real-time network and service management. So both, we started thinking southbound. So let's manage the devices using YANG data models, whether they are physical devices or whether they are virtual appliances, So that was the southbound discussion. And then I presented at a layer 1 to 3 event in London, actually in early 2012. And then I got contacted by a CTO of a company I didn't know that was called Tail-f. And he said, I have something which might actually fit your needs. Well, you get lots of contacts after a presentation, so I kind of stored him, and then at the Paris ITF 2012, the Tail-f team was insisting and was inviting us for dinner to explain what they actually did, because they were also using YANG northbound from such a real-time NSM and to model services. And this made it really sexy for us, because we would have a consistent YANG production chain in our real-time network and service management, where both the services are specified in YANG as well as the access and the configuration of the devices using YANG. And that was the story we had there. So very interesting turn sometimes you can take after a public presentation, if you have a good audience, like here.
Right, and they are terribly persistent, these Tail-f guys. Jack and Ihab, you haven't been maybe quite as visible. I don't know your story, but I gather you are actually very big YANG users and were quite early on the blocks with it. So please, would you, starting with you, Jack, tell your stories then about how you came across it and what's driven you to adopt it.
What drove us to adopt it was a $5.3 billion acquisition of TW Telecom. And TW had done a great job actually being a pretty early adopter. And that's how we got to that number, really, pretty much overnight. But the funny thing was we had really just in earnest started to spend a lot of time with Frederick and the team over the last year or so. So we got a great head start. You know, I was thinking as the other folks were making some comments. I'm an internet guy, kind of grew up around the internet like Dave, and we've had the same problem for 20 years. This whole device configuration problem has been something that I remember the first device configuration program that I ever wrote was with for those that are really old, you'll remember the M4C preprocessor language. It's a very
That's quite
you can make
sharing of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll get over it someday. But it really was the same problem over and over again. And telecom is frankly an embedded based problem set when you think about it. We buy equipment every year, and we don't take that equipment out a whole lot. And so we build up a huge bow wave of heterogeneous networks over decades. And this is really the first time, frankly, where you could see a path where we will have the ability to model services across that hugely heterogeneous environment that has been built over many, many decades. That's pretty exciting to us. The agility and OpEx benefits that everyone talks about, I think are real. I think it's probably the most exciting thing that we have in front of us that could really change our business.
Okay, so YANG is officially exciting. Ihab.
Yeah, hi. Well, we definitely don't have as many devices under Tail-f, but what our story is simple. We're a data center company, first of all, so we're not an alien network, and that makes our job a lot easier than the challenges a network has. So I should start with that for the fairness of all the network people here. Our story is that we have this partnership with Microsoft Azure, which you know Microsoft deployed the Azure Cloud Edge across the globe in 2014. They went from nothing to 19 markets. So in April, we finalized a deal with them where they want to deploy all over the world. And the only way our customers could use it is to provide full access to that Cloud Edge with security, performance, and full automation so people can activate capacity in 5 minutes. So to be able to activate capacity in 5 minutes and to deploy the whole platform in 2 months, we had in 2 months to deploy equipment in 19 cities across the globe and the full automation and OSS systems. There was only one way to do it, which is using YANG NETCONF. And we were able to launch the whole platform by July. There is no other option to do it. And that shows the power, as Jack and others were saying, of this new capability in terms of agility.
Okay, thank you very much, Ihab. Well, we also have service providers, sorry, why do I keep calling you service providers? I'm having a meltdown here. Vendors on the panel, and obviously from competing companies. I'm going to start with you, Jeff, saying, okay, so what's in it for you? Are you just being beaten up by operators, or are you really going to get something out of NETCONF YANG yourself?
Well, we're going to get beaten up by operators no matter what we do. But having been beaten up by them early on, we were principal in helping to develop NETCONF as a way to safely and transactionally configure networks. And we've been on board conceptually with YANG for quite a while as well. We've had our own modeling language that's very similar to YANG, and now we're rolling out actual official standardized YANG support. Thank you. Yes. Yes. The crowd may cheer. Thank you.
And Guy, I don't really associate Alcatel-Lucent with the YANG story.
Yeah, so I will be the party pooper. No, I won't. No, so I'll give you our perspective. Obviously, I'm wearing kind of two hats from cloud and NFV platform and the bigger Alcatel-Lucent story. And in that sense, NETCONF YANG very aligned with what we believe in. We believe in automation, we believe in simplicity and streamlining the operations. And in that sense, it's very much aligned in something that we think that is important. What I see today is where we are. And where we are, we are in the first phase of automating the instantiation of the service. And now the applications, internally within Alcatel-Lucent, are looking, okay, how can I move to the next phase, which is automating the configuration. There, NETCONF YANG is definitely the lead, in terms of simplicity. But at the end of the day, it will be up to our customers to define and to push us where they want to go. Obviously, I'm hearing quite loud what some of the customers are saying here. But there are several options. I think, from our perspective, what's important is that we do see the need for automating this phase of the service, of the configuration. It's a critical piece in all of the NFV vision that speaks about automation and a lot of operation, and we definitely need to be there.
Okay, thank you. And Dave, obviously Cisco felt so strongly that they went out and bought Tail-f systems, but Cisco and standards haven't really been the greatest bedfellows in the past. I mean, what's Cisco getting out of this?
Take it away, Dave.
Well, I guess our new bedfellows are Swedish, but so somebody who spent a long time in standards. Actually, I wanted to dovetail off what Margaret said. So I can remember being in conversations around, and with Axel and with other folks on the panel, around January 2011, when we came to the realization, or perhaps I personally came to the realization, that there needed to be a way, an object-oriented, data model-driven way of expressing intent in the network. And I can remember having conversations, including with Margaret, should we go with protobufs? Because, if Google did it, you get a little natural attraction, and then you realize that using something like protobufs is totally unstructured and unstandardizable. And so, okay, well, we can't do anything unstandardizable because of perhaps our previous bedfellows, which was with ourselves, creating proprietary interfaces. And proprietary interfaces are not what the industry wants. And I'll just summarize it for everybody on the panel before they flame about being non-open, because we are now following standardized protocols, in particular in our embedded OSs, where we've converted all of our embedded OSs, or are converting them to use NETCONF YANG interface. Now, the reason why this really came forward, and having worked in standards, when we were having these discussions in early 2011, and we looked at protobufs, and we came to the realization, well, what we wanted to do was attract developers and catalyze a developer community around networking. Developers are using JSON objects. And so what was interesting is if the developers you want are using JSON, and the networking and telco world and data center world needs open standards, there is no place to standardize JSON objects again. But when you need a data modeling, a model-driven or data modeling language for this, YANG, which had relatively languored through the IETF for a number of years, was the trajectory for a major SDO. There was a solid foundation there. And frankly, once you get to a data model-driven approach to this, you can auto-generate any type of interface you want out of it. And so from a YANG model, you can auto-generate JSON models. You can auto-generate almost protobufs or anything you want on top of this. The key is to have a data model-driven approach. To the point so much, now I managed to get myself addicted to my own Kool-Aid, and so this also meant that not only was creating NetConf YANG in the embedded OS is critical, not only was it there for service orchestration, but also in open source, driving this by creating a data model-driven approach to automatically take the YANG schemas and then generate REST interfaces, and that's similar to the generalization of the architecture of Open Daylight. So YANG for myself and YANG for our company is really the shiznit. I mean, it's getting us not only off CLI, completely overcoming the fatal flaws of SNMP, getting something towards that's model-driven, and working in a standards community like the IETF and now the MEF, which a number of folks on the panel have also helped drive, for a service model representation as well as an object representation in the interfaces.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I was going to ask a question about benefits, but I mean, I think the panelists have more than amply demonstrated those. So instead, I'd like to ask you, how many people from in the audience are here from mobile equipment vendors or Internet of Things vendors? Anybody here from? Okay, and are any of you looking at modeling your equipment using NetConf YANG? Okay, we have one hand. Oh, one hand. Okay. Well, no, yes. Sorry, Dave. Yeah, two hands. I wasn't looking. Is this something that the panel wants? Is this something that, because at the moment I associate YANG models very much with devices in the transport network rather than mobile access.
Well, that's how it started, and but there shouldn't be a limitation. So what we're, for example, designing as our real-time network and service management shouldn't be limited just to IP devices or virtualized network functions. It could be anything. It could be the full mobile network. And it has to be anything at one point in time, because why should we run different management systems for that purpose if it's much cleaner and much easier to provision end-to-end services this way? Now, obviously, this work hasn't started, and it will require even more SDOs in the picture to actually work on these standards which are required, and that triggers some interesting discussions on competition between SDOs.
So
Margaret first.
Go ahead.
Okay, my role today is actually implementation, and I'm getting in front of all the different projects in AT&T to get onto the Domain 2.0 platform. And we got into a debate of is the STN controller and this YANG NetConf only good for layer 2, 3, or layer 1, 2, and 3, and maybe layer 4 plus. And as we started discussing at the application layer, layer 7, we're realizing a lot of the functionality that we're doing or restructured in the STN controller is actually very similar to what the application layer needs. Once you virtualize an application, whether it's a layer 7, 3, 2, and 1, the functions that are necessary to support that are the same. You do scale out, you do site failover, you do moving of the VNF for whatever reason, and then the WAN traffic needs to follow. And so we're having, YANG is just a modeling language. It's not a network modeling language. It's just a modeling language. And so we're starting to have a discussion as the app people are saying, we can't use ODL because it's all network, because they see the words. And we're actually picking it apart and saying, well, if you look at YANG, it doesn't say it's network. It's just a modeling language for you to describe what you want to do. And so even our layer 7 organizations, if I call it that, are seriously looking at YANG. Now the issue is, does an application layer entity use NetConf? And that might be a stretch, but you have to configure something, right? And so if we can somehow create common platform pieces which aren't specific to that virtualized function, and we can parameterize, if I call it that virtual function, I think we'll get the best of all worlds. We solve this once from a flow, and then we just have analytics that are specific to that function. We have service, or descriptions through a YANG model that's specific to that function. And we have, data collection and so forth, and maybe database storage that's specific to that function, but the rest of it should be the same.
Okay. Jack, you had something to add?
Yeah, I was going to go a little different direction. Just that telecom is a crazy numbers game. When you think about number of devices in a network, million, depending on size, everybody's got a million of something. And I'd say I don't know why we would stop at IP devices or this particular class of devices. I think it's the same problem as you look up and down the stack, and I don't know why we need a Yang 1, Yang 2, Yang 3, or different modeling language to work across that whole set of architectures.
But what's interesting, Jack, is there's always seems to be a tendency in the industry over the years that if something works, let's take everything we ever invented and stick it into it. And that's the definition of BGP. And we managed to trip over that. And so, as Margaret was saying, and as you're saying, look, you can model video delivery, you can model mobile or virtualized EPG, you can model security appliances. That's perfectly fine. But what I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't replace diameter routing, which is performing a very specific function, or a message bus, which is performing a very specific function, with what Yang can do. Now, what's interesting is that even objects inside a message bus can be modeled inside Yang. So make sure you're using the right tool for the right job and not trying to force fit it into everything.
Although BGP and DNS are probably the two greatest examples of extensibility that, at least in our technology lifetime.
Yeah, they do work. But what's interesting is we're not trying to stick BGP in the middle of a mobile network when it's doing diameter routing. Mm-hmm. And so even then we managed to, calm ourselves down. It took a long time, but.
Yeah, well, I think especially in this area, we are now introducing into our networks the cloudified environment. I think it's very interesting to actually look where Yang will play a role. Because when you look at OpenStack, for example, there's no Yang in the picture. Should there be? I think yes, because it would make my life much easier. Now, discussing this with the OpenStack community, you will hear, no, we don't need that. We have our RESTful interfaces and we're perfectly fine. I think we will enter other areas, and where it makes sense, we should use Yang. Where it doesn't make sense, I would avoid it, sure.
And perhaps from a standards community side, actually, Caroline, we need to spend more time. There is actually active development of Yang model tooling for low-power devices, for example. But to the rest of the panel's point, it's just that they are not going to use NetConf for it. They have constraints on the link layer that are such that NetConf is not a perfect fit. So I think that this association, again, echoing what everyone is saying, is really important to understand. It's a very powerful asset modeling language, and it should be, used for that. And then you feature match and you pick the best protocol for whatever environment, whatever context you're doing. So there is actually tangible IoT traction for Yang, not so much for NetConf, but definitely for Yang.
Okay. Thank you. So are there any shortcomings, EHAB, shortcomings with NetConf Yang? I mean, following on from this in a way, Carl's just mentioned NetConf in the IoT world, but are there others that you'd like to see addressed?
For us, our network, by the way, just to add one thing to the team before, we are going down to layer 1, 2, 3, just like Jack. We don't see the difference at all ourselves. So. But the higher service areas, I agree with Dave that that's a whole different discussion. So for us, the biggest challenge right now is that people like Juniper have Yang NetConf as native to the device, but most people are still debating if they're going to make it native or not in their equipment. And so I think the implementation is varied, and that means the use case we're after is agility to be able to activate our costs inside the data center in a very distributed fashion, again, inside these massive data centers and between them, inside our campuses. And to do that across layer 1, 2, 3, multiple equipment vendors, which we have 6+, we really have we need a much more consistent implementation of Yang NetConf. And the second issue we see that's holding thing up is that we really would like some standardization on Yang so we can pull objects off the web and just use them quick. And I think the whole industry is going down that path. But I think it's a very powerful tool when these two things happen. This thing can accelerate enormously.
I think for me, for us, it falls under how you manage disruptions. There is a big disruption right now going with the telcos moving to NFV, and a lot of them are pushing many things that are not necessarily related to the same solution. And we see that with Tosca. Tosca meant to help with instantiation of a service, but in terms of requests we get in from customers that they wanted to solve the entire problem of the world. So in that sense, I think the gaps that will be with NetConf YANG, the deltas are very much related to where we wanted to focus. And it will be up to us as vendors sometimes to focus the conversation and not position it as, hey, I have that's something that can do everything, that can replace diameter, can replace everything that your OSS did till today, but just find the right place that it can start, and from there it will grow.
Well, this isn't our first time in this rodeo, right? You look back in the past, and again, whether it was SNMP, and I actually did work on Wellfleet routers and Bay routers, which use these pieces. We've also been down the Corba IDL path. We've been down GSMP. We've been down COPS. We've done PCMM. This is not our first rodeo of modeling. But YANG doesn't have a lot of those fundamental limitations of a compiled object, where every time that a feature changes, you get to load new software again. Instead, it is a schema-based approach, which fundamentally doesn't have those limitations, which, Caroline, I think was the question, of those other modeling languages. And if we don't get trapped into MTOSI model or a Corba model or a COPS model, which are things that we must avoid as an industry, we have an opportunity, again, to rapidly use a easy-to-use modeling language to represent common objects on the network and standardize them and move forward. So,
thank you. Well, I think you, Guy, mentioned Tosca, and I think you, Dave, pointed out about the shortcomings of RESTful interfaces to do some of these things. But obviously, in the IT world, there's a whole raft of things bubbling up: Chef, Puppet, Ansible, and then of course there's OpenFlow as well. And I think this is huge confusion. There's huge confusion. And if you say, well, there's horses for courses, where you're going to use this and where you're going to use that, how does somebody navigate through that and decide what they should use where? And do these other things coming from the IT world have any value? I mean, Margaret, do you have any comment on that?
I think, Puppet and Chef, it's solving a different set of problems, right? So getting back to the network, YANG is a modeling language for us to model, the data, right? Puppet and Chef is more of a workflow orchestration type, I don't call it orchestration, but a way to automate workflow. So they're just different. They're just different.
So let me add to that. So, I talk to a lot of people that actually conflate these things, and it's. I have a whole set of slides on just that. The way I usually end up saying this is that, yes, of course, you can probably use YANG to keep your web cache updated with the most recent version patches, and you can probably use Puppet to provision VPNs across a very large network, but it would be horrible. Both would be awful. See what I mean? To Margaret's point, these are different problem domains, and of course, maybe we're pushing that here. Positioning NetConf and YANG as giving you the ability to walk on water will give some people a too big of a hammer, right? So we'll see people trying to apply it in a little bit of an awkward fashion. And to Margaret's point again, the application lifecycle is something that I would be very careful in trying to pin YANG and NetConf as tools for.
Yeah, I would say every whatever you call these functions have their core competency, and then of course maybe they can quote extend out, but you want to at least have one version or implementation of the core competency versus multiple. And now it is up to the industry to recognize quickly core competency. I'm making an analogy of like these SDN controllers. I mean, we are all over the place on what an SDN controller does. And I would say the different SDN controllers that are evolving actually start with a core competency. And they're all trying to be the controller, but where they're starting, it's not clear there exists the controller, but at least recognize as you have all these multiple controllers that each is starting with a core competency in a certain space. And skeptical whether or not there's the one. So you have the same thing with this, is there's the one. No. And so now we as an industry have to recognize we're the core competency and just slot, this is for this role, that's for that role, and then evolve.
Yeah. As you also mentioned, OpenFlow in this area, there is no competition between YANG and OpenFlow. These are completely different domains. And in fact, also OFConfig is based on YANG. But if you look at, for example, how Open Daylight is built, here you see another value of YANG, that you can actually model also the southbound interface from that controller in YANG and achieve some flexibility which was not possible before. So I think there are more use cases for YANG, but don't misuse it, and definitely it doesn't replace OpenFlow, and it won't replace BGP or anything.
I find it fascinating walking around the floor here the last couple of days. Every booth has something about SDN, NFV, or cloud on it. I defy you to find one booth that doesn't. It's kind of funny. I always tell my kids, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that's a very important thing for our community. Whether you're on the buying technology side or the selling technology side, we'd be really careful as to what in fact we want each one of these solutions, each one of these technologies to do. And we need to kind of stick to the guiding principles. I'll tell you one other funny thing I heard today. I was with an unnamed hardware vendor, and they were explaining their SDN NFV solution and how it was vendor agnostic. And I said, oh, that's awesome. Can I run it on the hardware that I have currently? And they said, no, you have to buy our hardware. Serious. And so let's make sure we
just for the record, we don't sell hardware. Servers at Alcatel-Lucent, we do sell hardware.
But it sort of speaks to the fact that we shouldn't redefine the facts. We should make sure that when we say, it's appropriate for this part of our network, we in fact keep it to that part of our network.
Keeping with Jack's theme, the other thing I thought was really funny is people are now saying everything you can buy from us, you can buy virtualized. But now you need to buy our servers. Oh my God.
Yeah. But there will be a confusion, at the end, I think this team doesn't really represent the common customers we engage with, you're high-end, it. But when some of the meetings we have, no, I'm telling you, you know it.
You guys can make all the margin from them.
But, when you still have the discussion with customers, some of them are still mixing between NFV and SDN. Some of them are still mixing with the basics. So, definitely it will take time to educate. And I don't think at the end there will be one technology that will take it all. In every area that there is a problem, there will be few solutions. I'm not sure what will be the market share for each one of them. But, definitely I don't believe that NETCONF and YANG will be the only solution or the only protocol for service configuration. The question will be, how many other options will be and how you can educate the customers or our customers to explain what the value of each one of them and what the different capabilities it provides.
But I think it's important. I'm sorry. I think it's important, though, as an industry. I don't think we can afford to have multiple versions if it's not necessary. It's not good for the industry. Just like this whole proliferation of SDN controllers in some sense, but I understand where they're at. And as you have two different markets, if I call it that, the market that might be fine, us as the high end, and the market that really still wants to have the whole solution bundled together by a vendor, I think it's important for the vendor community to create one, I guess, modular, if I call it that, solution for both markets, so that, fine, the ones that are like us that wants to mix and match, you have that available. And then, of course, the ones that want the bundle, obviously you can bundle. I think it'll be a shame if you try to do two versions because in the end, we're going to be divided and conquered.
I think that is an awesome point. I mean, all we want is, as buyers, is we want economies of scale. Yeah. And so the industry building 3 or 4 different solutions doesn't give each participant an economy of scale. It doesn't give the industry an economy of scale. All we want as buyers is to have that economy.
Yeah, right. And let's not over-position YANG at this point in time. It still requires serious work. We have convinced all our 4 router vendors to support YANG data models. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's a specific YANG data model for Juniper, a specific YANG data model for Cisco, a specific YANG data model for Arlo, and one for Huawei. That doesn't help. So we require serious work in the ITF, in the standardization, to actually develop those standard YANG data models to do what we want, and then we have achieved the goal. But right now, there's a certain risk that actually each vendor says, oh, yeah, we have YANG, no problem, and they still deliver their proprietary thing just encoded in YANG. That doesn't help.
Okay, we've got a router vendor at the end there. He's been dying to talk for the last 10 minutes. So.
Well, going back several questions, I mean,
I thought you were going to answer that one.
Oh no, that's not answerable. But the question about
I'm going to re-ask it.
About whether Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Salt, the workflow management systems would work with the NetConf YANG. I mean, there are very good examples in the real world of NetConf, on GitHub actually, of NetConf being a very good driver for Ansible and Chef and Puppet. And that's because in NetConf what it does is it abstracts the transaction of the very, very difficult transaction logic of dealing with the network, provisioning a network device, and allows the workflow management layer to be a lot simpler, right? So that works. Let me just also mention that, I think that nobody mentioned one acronym that I've seen on every booth as well, which is IoT is on every booth.
I was going to add that. Yeah.
But and going back to the IoT comment, the concept of NetConf being inappropriate for IoT, if Carl says something negative about NetConf, then, it should be taken seriously. But on the other hand, no protocol, so HTTP web services are not in their native form appropriate for IoT either, and they're being modified, simplified, and using piggybacking and header compression and other techniques to develop modified protocols for that domain. And I don't see why NetConf couldn't possibly follow that path as well and be a good potential candidate for infrastructure management and IoT as well.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go back to Axel's point, because I think it's a good one. And isn't there something called the open config? I mean, where are these services going to come from? Where are these sort of abstract services? One of them, I don't know if it was you, Ehab, or Jack, was talking about, services that you could just download. They're like the models, just download them. And in fact, I do know other operators who've got that idea as well. Let's just download them from the web. And to get to that, you need what Axel's talking about. So where are they going to come from? Is the open config effort going to produce them? Are you going to produce them as operators and open source them? Because obviously the vendors are rather reluctant here. Well, I don't know if all the vendors
Careful.
are.
Yeah, no, careful.
Okay.
Careful.
Dave, come on then.
Okay, so the issue we have facing the standardization of YANG data models to keep them, let's say, one or ubiquitous across a heterogeneous network of different vendors is that the current way we're looking at standardizing these is by following our SNMP model, which was allow each and every working group to suddenly become experts in YANG and completely distribute this problem. Well, it sounds great, from management theory that if you want to be able to scale out a problem, have more people working on it. Well, we already have, we've waded through that quicksand for decades already with respect to SNMP. So thankfully, the IETF and the MEF has changed that model, which is that they're going to start with a service, and it could be, and for example, layer 3 VPN, layer 2 VPN, Ethernet private line, blah, blah, blah. Pick it, start with these services and focus top down on the services that are most critical as defined by other colleagues on the panel and by the open config piece, and allow that to begin to define how those models will work. So will somebody be able to download them from the web? The answer is yes, because that's now the fundamental goal of how they're standardized at both the IETF and MEF. That, in conjunction with distributing this out for, here's how I model an adjacency, here's how I model this piece of that protocol, or here's how I do NetFlow, or blah, 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 as you need for a wide variety of these features. The key thing is that it is also happening in parallel, that it's top down. And a lot of these, my colleagues here on this panel, as well as their colleagues in the industry, are the ones who are driving this. So it's great to see that turn and a fundamentally different way of doing this than the old standards. Hey, let's just distribute this to everybody, and eventually we'll get there in 10 years. I think from just speaking for my friends on the panel, the most important thing is to get through this stage. The exciting part of building and operating the internet is all that the internet can do, and we've needed this for so long that the faster we can do this, and not be confused that there may be different options of doing that. And I'm sorry, Guy, I actually completely disagree with you that anyone should ever delay on trying to get these protocols done, because it might be confusing of whether or not Puppet and Chef could also be used. This one has got to go faster. And so I really am happy to see that standards bodies are moving in the right way.
So Axel, are you reassured?
I don't need to be reassured. I'm pretty sure, actually. And indeed, serving both in the ONF board and as advisory director in the MEF board and being active in the ITF since quite some time, yes, I think it's happening, but it's on us. This doesn't come out of the sky, and we need to work on it. So.
Yeah, I think there's some new concepts here that will also drive this to happen. There's some commercial pressures that will make it happen this time. So first of all, the old implementation of MPLS is not needed anymore. You need a much more simplified version, in my view, that is for cloud-type applications, because the cloud providers are doing their own infrastructure and their own services at multiple stacks. So we don't need to standardize the old MPLS. We need a more forward-looking thing. Number two, I think the biggest new thing from our view is that with YANG NetConf now, if one of the vendors, let's say ALU, decides to have the layer 3 VPN services available, you could use it on everybody else's devices, which means for the first time, we can pick the best service with the best software, the best hardware as a customer, which we never had. That choice was never open to us. It came as a single package. And I would say the equipment providers are some of the best providers of services ever. You know, they've spent 10 years doing layer 3 VPN services. So they can definitely do it. But I see it like what happened to the storage. When storage became virtualized and you can unbundle software and hardware, you started to see new storage software capabilities in the cloud that were amazing. So I really think there'll be disrupted forces here of people coming up with services that are in addition to the equipment providers. So may not be what the panel wants to hear, but in my view, this wheel is now moving because there's a new way of delivery that's fast, that, like Jack said, thousands of devices are now enabled with it. So that's what I think is happening.
The general industry trend, and Axel, you started off talking about this, which is get these old OSS systems out of our way that are dealing with individual devices, that are dealing with things either command line by command line or whatever the case might be. There isn't anybody on this panel that I haven't heard from personally that's saying, get all my routine tasks out of the way. The number one thing is faster service activation, and they also remind me that the more customers they have, the more bandwidth they need, and you know, the world's a bigger business in a better place. And so once, at least, you know, for me, once I fundamentally realize that I can only go as fast as my customers can go, and if NetConf and YANG helps them operate their networks faster, they're onboarding new services faster, and so it's in my interest to make all of that go faster. But Axel, it's back to get these OSSs out of my way.
Services are getting more complicated, and networks are getting more complicated. And you know, first rule of computer science is create hierarchy when you can't scale. This is another way to create hierarchy for an operator. It's a way to take out human touch. It's a way to take out steps and processes that frankly can and should be automated. It's the only way, as you think about all the stuff coming, how are you going to provision just service?
And of course, the second rule of computer science is, add another layer of abstraction, and this adds a standardized, standardized layer of abstraction for stuff. So I mean, these are pretty basic principles. I agree, Jack.
But I would say there's still some gaps on the YANG, right? Besides having some common standards or structure or definition, the other is, see, we're changing our model in AT&T where we're having our service developers write YANG models, and that's a challenge. And so we really need a front end, if I call it that, that makes it easier for our service developers to create the Yang models, and then we flow through. And so people are now creating, different versions internally, externally, and so forth. And if we can just, I don't know where, if we can just have the one open one, or maybe that makes it easier for folks who are not programmers to use it.
So I agree, Margaret. If there's one big gap in the NetConf YANG ecosystem is that there isn't, I'll use this term just for sake of conversation, there isn't the IDE like there is, or the development tools like there are around Java. And so for big adoption by application developers, these tools have to be there. And so there's a gap in standardization for heterogeneity or ubiquity across heterogeneous networks, but also those developer tools are absolutely key.
Axel, did you have a comment there?
No, I fully agree. So our initial vision was, oh yeah, let's let's have the program manager, product manager code the service description. No. So maybe there's a new opportunity for trainings for PMs, but sure, we need the proper tools, and they don't exist today.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to now turn it over to the audience. Are there any audience questions for our illustrious panel?
How about from the panel to the audience?
That's a good one.
How many people in the audience actively use NetConf YANG in their networks today, or in their services today?
No, you can't raise your hand.
How many people know what YANG stands for? I asked about 30 people that in the last year, and only I think Frederick was the first one who actually told me. But yeah, it's funny. Yet another next gen.
So it's a question, sorry, from Michael. I'll have to run around.
Some developers.
Where's it? Oh, right.
Hi, this is mostly for the operator guys. So, in terms of YANG and well, specifically YANG, as you're talking about, you can model a lot of things. Some devices might not pick up on NetConf. I'm thinking specifically optical here, just to be pointed about the issue. So some devices may not pick up on NetConf as a means of communicating with them. So are you thinking basically you're looking for an adapter and you're going to you want everything done in YANG, and if a vendor doesn't pick up on NetConf, then I'm still going to use YANG, and if I need you to build an adapter or you're out.
Yeah, I would have answered it. Over time, I think it'll be assuming everything gains traction, over time, I think we'll vote with our checkbook. And, maybe we build an adapter, maybe we pay somebody to build an adapter for a while, but I think over time, if it's really gaining traction, we have some real world examples of that today where our implementation talks to one set of vendors and not to another, and so guess who's getting our money?
I think as well, we will solve that through enough pressure. I know last year in this panel I said torture and blackmailing. I won't repeat that same mistake again.
Just torture.
Yeah, but it requires market pressure, and I'm really against programming adapters for that, because it just makes us lose the whole advantages of this nice and clean solution.
It sounds like 50 Shades of Yang, Axel.
I thought that's what we had already. I thought that's
since Dave is wearing a suit and a tie, I don't know.
Boy, it's so hard to follow that. But I would say we buy adapters for everything today from Tail-f. Yeah. And what happens is, after we buy adapters, the vendors are coming back to us to say, we want to be back with a relationship with you. Because they don't want to be cut out of the discussion. But adapters are available for a lot of things, including the optical.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Everybody? Oh, one there. Oh, sorry about this.
So I keep relating to the YANG and NetConf history to the XML and standardization of HTML to XHTML. And I see so many similarities. You know, the browser wars, the CSS, different implementation of Explorer, Mozilla, Opera, you know the story, right? But I keep struggling. Where is the W3C consortium, you know, the W3C consortium, indeed, equivalent in this story? Who is meeting and who is trying to standardize into the XHTML equivalent of what a standards compliant web page, in your case, standards compliant YANG model? What is the entity, you know, and the meeting? That's why I don't know.
So what you're asking is who's putting together a usable set of kind of best practices or something equivalent to that? So I think what you're, tying all the way back to Dave, of course, the technologies themselves emanate out of the IETF, right? So there's a lot of interest in this area in the IETF. And of course, the IETF is responsible over time for many of the both hits and misses of the foundational internet technologies, right? So I think the IETF, rightly so, feels compelled or called to standardizing, let's say, the foundational, the MIB2, if you like, for YANG, like the system level YANG and the interfaces structure. Then it gets a little bit more complicated, right? You go into something that sounds simple like Ethernet. You get the IEEE that feel very strongly that that's their domain, right? So the important part, actually, for the IETF, if I can slip my little IETF hat on, is to make sure that we don't overstep too many boundaries, but that we provide a useful and structured subset, you know, a starting point, if you like, that we then can actually allow, if they want to, other SDOs to hook into. So I think what you're looking for is actually the work that is being done right now under some labor pain in the IETF, where we again provide the anchor points, if you like, the foundational structure for others to work off of. And well, this is a much longer conversation I'd love to have offline if you want, but it's trying to leverage the extensibility of YANG, which is one of the finer points of that technology that goes way above and beyond what other technologies like SMI or the MIB languages and other languages have done before, for this expressed purpose, right? That we understood that there's going to be a limit to what a single SDO can do, and we wanted to make sure that others, both proprietary solutions and other SDOs, can hook into what the IETF produces.
So in addition, the service models on top, the MEF is headed in that direction. They're doing everything in YANG modeling as well. Now, what you're also seeing emerge is that the MEF is communicating with the TM forum of how to plug this into even OSSBSs and transform those APIs from the TM forum to YANG APIs. But at this point in the history of the internet, although this is a bit challenging, you have to follow open source projects. Nobody is waiting for an SDO anymore. And instead, if in fact that there's agreement of what that interoperable standard is going to look like and somebody puts it into open source, by all means, let's do that. Let's let code win at this point, and then we'll take it to standards and let them catch up. But this is not the time to wait for consensus among thousands of professional standards people to argue amongst themselves, to come up with a data model, and especially when those people don't write any code. And now let's join the two together.
So, so there's a new organization, I have to put my pitch in, for OPNFV, and the whole value proposition of this OPNFV, open source or open framework consortium that's under Linux, is to provide an environment, as we have all these different open source pieces, an environment to provide an end-to-end integration, because you have all these different pieces that are coming out of the woodwork that are open, and we want to build and put it all together. And one of the challenges we as a user has is everyone's coming up with their own combinations. We're all trying to do this end-to-end integration. And so as these YANG models get created through some use case scenarios that we're developing, our goal is to integrate it into this end-to-end test arena that just got created. Okay.
Thank you. As someone said to me earlier today, standards are going to become just a running commentary on things that have already happened. Any other questions? Or should we all decamp for cocktails? I think that sounds a very good idea. Well, thank you very much indeed to my panel, Jeff, Guy, Ehab, Jack, Axel, Margaret, Dave, and Carl. Thank you all very much indeed.